Hello, in this video, we are going to start learning how to read an academic paper. We will learn about the structure of an academic paper, specifically focusing on the title and the abstract of the paper, introduction and methodology. We will learn about how each of these elements are related to the central argument of the paper. We begin with a screenshot of how the first page of an academic paper looks like and what information we might glean from it about the paper at a first glance. All journal articles provide detailed information about the location of the paper. In this case, on top right corner, we see this information clearly. The name of the journal, which is Politics and Space, volume and issue number given in brackets, the page numbers of the article and the year of publication. We come now to the most important part of this beginning, which is the title of the academic paper. A good, effective title of an academic paper begins to hint towards the main argument of the paper. In this case, the authors write smart as undemocratic, followed by a question mark. The placing of the question mark is crucial here. The authors are indicating that they want to question the assumption that smart city is democratic and might possibly want to argue that it is undemocratic. This title is different from a merely descriptive title, which might have merely said, "A case study of the smart city imaginary in Kolkata." But here the authors are already beginning to tell us what their argument might be. The title also clearly locates the research in Kolkata in India. Please read the titles of the papers or chapters carefully as you begin to piece together the argument of a paper. And lastly, we need to be mindful of the author or authors of a paper whose names are cited at the beginning of any academic paper. We now look at the next part, that is the abstract of the paper. The function of an abstract is to give the reader an overview of the paper in a concise manner. Abstracts are typically not longer than 250 to 300 words. We will take a look at this abstract to see what aspects go into the making of a concise overview of the paper. The first sentence of the abstract is indicative. It begins by telling us about the popularity of smart city ideas across the world. It then immediately moves on to how India is no exception. What the authors are essentially doing here is to move from the broader context of across the world to the specific context of India. This is a typical move in academic writing, to move from the general to the specific. The authors go on to tell us what happened in India in terms of the national government inviting smart city proposals from many cities. What this part collectively does is to set the context for the author's argument. It tells us a bit about the backdrop of the realm of smart cities in India before moving on to the research. This initial context is necessary in order that our research question makes sense to the readers and that they understand the relevance of our research. The authors then shift to the main research question that they ask in this paper. And sure enough, carrying from the title of the paper, we see that they are questioning whether the making of the smart city proposal of New Town Kolkata was indeed a democratic process as it claimed to be. They also specify the three aspects along which they will measure how democratic the proposal was: distributive, participatory, and responsive. In the next part of the abstract, we see another important element of the research, that is, its methodology. Here is the place where the authors are specifying that their research is based on an analysis of documents and interviews with policymakers and citizens. And then we move on to the next few statements, which are precisely the answers to each of these questions posed earlier: that the proposal was not distributive, that participation and responsiveness were there, but with significant caveats. The abstract ends with a broad argument statement or thesis statement that emerges out of all the above findings. The latter half of the abstract is thus constituted by the research questions and the arguments of the paper. Thus, we see how an abstract contains in a condensed manner the most important elements of the paper we are about to read: the context of research, research questions, methodology, and the argument that the authors make. The abstract of all academic papers ends with keywords. Here is the set of keywords from this paper, which includes politics of participation, smart cities, inclusiveness, democracy, socio-technical imaginary, and so on. Keywords like the abstract are also a crucial indicator of the key concepts that the argument is based upon. A well-written academic paper will have the keywords feature in significant ways in the article. They would be well defined and would be elaborated upon. So as a reader, keep close watch on whether and how these keywords make an appearance in the rest of the paper. We now move to the main body of the paper and begin with the introduction of an academic paper. So what are the main parts of an introduction and what function does the introduction perform in the larger paper? The introduction begins with a sentence which tells the readers that democracy in India is in decline. The first paragraph then elaborates upon this decline in democracy through various ways. We see in the last sentence how the authors make a connection between their research and this decline in democracy in India. That smart city proposals are also one way of suppressing certain voices. Notice the thread which follows from the title of smart cities being undemocratic. So in the introduction, the authors begin with the background of the state of democracy in India itself as the context. An important part of the introduction is to set the context of the research, which we see is happening in this first paragraph. We then move on to the research questions that the authors ask. While reading an academic text, you should always be mindful of what the research questions are. A good paper will clearly lay out its research questions, like the authors do here. Please notice how the research questions continue the thread from the abstract about distribution, participatory nature, and the responsiveness of the smart city proposal in order to assess its democratic credentials. Importantly, the authors follow their research questions with how they are going to go about answering them. They tell us that they will specifically study urban mobility aspects of the proposal, since mobility is central to the idea of smart cities. The authors then also specify what theoretical approach they will use in order to conduct their research. They tell us that they will use the concept of an imaginary. This is where the authors signal what concepts they are using in order to frame their understanding of the smart city proposal. Here is where the term imaginary is being explained by connecting it to the idea of imagination. In the draft of the paper, you will also see that there is another paragraph about imaginary included, which explains this concept in detail. The next important part of the introduction is to convey to the readers why this research is relevant or what its contributions to the field will be. Once again, we see that the authors address that very clearly, enumerating how their study will contribute to a methodology of studying smart cities and to showing their exclusionary nature. We see how in showing their contribution, the authors have circled back to their main argument that smart cities are not democratic and the way they are imagined keeps certain sections of the society out. The continual reference to the main research question, directly or indirectly, is hallmark of good academic writing. As a reader, the central argument gets continually reinforced for us. We now come to the end of the introduction section. The last paragraph begins by telling us what the next section contains. The end of the introduction section generally includes a map to the rest of the paper, which clearly tells the reader how the paper is organized and what to expect in each section. As we see in this paragraph, the authors use various signaling phrases to point out to the reader the sequence of the coming sections and what their content will be. Now that we have taken a look at the introductory section, here is a quick recap of what an introduction section of an academic paper typically consists of. The introduction does the important work of providing context to the research in terms of telling us about the location of the research or the particular time when the research was conducted, as well as telling us about what other research on this topic is saying. The introduction lays out for the reader in clear terms the research questions that the author is asking, as well as puts forth their central argument. The other important part of the introduction is to specify what concepts or theoretical framework will be used in order to analyze the data. And the last two essential elements of an introduction include the contribution or the relevance of the study and to tell the reader how the paper will be organized. We now focus on the next important section in an academic paper, the methodology section. This section is crucial for it lays out for the readers the ways in which the author of the paper has conducted their research, the basis on which they have chosen their sample or material, and the possible biases and exclusions that the study design might have. Methodologies can be quantitative in nature or can focus on qualitative data or can be a mix of both. This section is crucial for it establishes the credibility of the data on which the paper's arguments are based. Let's see how the methodology section plays out in this paper. The authors of this paper begin by clearly stating what their material of analysis is. We see in this case it is policy documents on the smart city proposals as well as feedback provided by the government on these proposals. This section further continues by elaborating upon the other methods of collecting data, that is, semi-structured interviews with different constituencies of citizens. For each of the constituencies interviewed, the authors also tell us what was the focus of these interviews. For instance, they asked citizens about their smart city aspirations. With transport and policy practitioners, they asked another set of questions regarding processes through which citizens' participation was ensured in the making of the smart city proposals. We see a similar elaboration upon the profile of interviewees in the following section of methodology. As the authors tell us, another set of interviewees were from the marginalized section. The authors specify what kind of data was obtained through these interviews. We thus see that this study relies heavily on qualitative methods of document analysis and semi-structured interviews. In this video, we have begun our engagement with an academic paper by getting acquainted with the abstract, introduction, and the methodology section of the paper. We have seen how each of these sections play an important role in taking the thread of the main argument ahead and take care to ensure that ideas that are present in the abstract are carried ahead through the introduction and the methodology sections. Thank you.